some of those people have been in meetings in that meeting for days. They never showered or ate, for a couple days. What are they doing in there? God knows, and things just don't move forward. I call productive work, actually producing a product or a service, which many dysfunctional companies struggle to do. After customer service, after sales service. Don't get me started on that. I have a whole chapter on customer service, where, if an employee is caught talking to a customer, they get reprimanded, right? you know, and so trying to improve things, and those are that's what I call productive.
My guest today is Joel Dubin. He's a seasoned businessman, but beyond that, he's a seasoned observer, and he's taken decades of corporate consulting experience and turned it into an insightful and hysterical book on human and group behavior in the corporate world. His book is The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. Come join us for a great conversation and more than a few laughs. Joel, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Great. My name is Joel Dubin, and I'm a retired cybersecurity consultant. And I worked for decades in the cybersecurity field, and I worked both for a number of companies, as well as consulting with maybe 100 different companies along the way, both here in the U.S., around all over the U.S., and around the world. And I just, there was a lot of frustrations working in the corporate world, but more actually working with my clients as well. And I just kind of felt like a lot of times I was just constantly banging my head dealing with bureaucracy, office politics, toxic work environments, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And there were points where I would just kind of get depressed or saddened by everything that went on, or like, how can I escape this? I didn't see a way out, and I thought, wow, when I had the opportunity to retire, I'll write a book. That'll be my therapy, But it's based on what I call the the book is called The 7 Habits of Highly Dysfunctional Companies. And it's based on seriously common traits that I ran into over and over and over, like almost like a cookie cutter template, that I saw at all of these companies. So it didn't come out of thin air. I also went through a lot of ups and downs. And, in the course of my long career, I've been laid off 3 times. I had to kind of deal with both the emotional baggage with that, and also, kind of having to pick myself up, dust myself off again, and look for work. And I was very good at it. I kind of set up systems where I wasn't unemployed for often more than a month, if that. And that's kind of another lesson, from the book. I talk a little bit about, looking what you should look for in a company, and kind of when you should jettison out, and when you should parachute, and what you should do. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Prior to my years in the cybersecurity business, I was actually in another business entirely. I was in the international shipping and import-export business, and you're thinking, wow, what's the connection there? 2 very wildly different fields. Well, I'll tell you, there was a lot of shady people out there in the import-export world, and a lot of fraud I had to deal with, and kind of a lot of activities that just were not always savory in terms of business. That actually was very good training for cybersecurity, because I'm very good at picking out fraud and picking out bogus deals and stuff like that. So that's, Pat, that's my story, and that's where I'm at, and I'm happily retired, and working on other books as well, humor books as well.
Your book is hysterical. I mean, I loved it. I'd love to kind of go through it chapter by chapter, if you don't
Sure.
mind,
Yeah.
because I can't. I'll tell you, if you have it's a long book. Was it 390 pages or something?
368 pages.
368 pages. This is the perfect book for a long. Get the audio version for a long trip. It is so funny. You'll arrive in a great frame of mind. The first chapter is called "If It Makes Sense, Don't Do It."
So what that's all about, that's just, I call that the fundamental chapter. I say the best way to use the book, you can, if you want, rip it up into pieces and throw it up in the air. And maybe the smartest thing any business person should do is at that point throw the book away, because if they follow what's in the book, they'll actually run their business into the ground. I call it an anti-manual of what not to do in business. But before you do that, you have to master the first habit, and that's, if it makes sense, don't do it. If it's complicated, make it simple. Everything should be aggravation. There should be bureaucracy. There should be endless approvals. If something can be done simply in an email, no, don't do that. You got to have a meeting. And not one meeting. Let's have a series of meetings. Let's create a committee to determine if we need a meeting. I mean, just endless kind of crap that we've all run through. It should be easier to actually buy stationery or pens and pencils at the corner store outside the office than to actually go through your own purchasing department within the company. Now, that's kind of a very simple, basic, everyday thing, but think, if you can't do that, imagine what it's like to get some strategy change, or imagine to get any strategy done. Some of these companies think that company events are strategy, having famous people show up at carnivals and stuff, or as I say, the sword swallowers and the fire eaters. Then people feel real good, or if they're sober during these events, and they call that strategy. And just other just crazy nonsensical things like locating the offices away from where the employees work. Let's have employees have long commutes. Then they'll be fresh and crisp and ready to work. Um, uh, Often I found, for instance, companies would close retailers would close stores in popular locations. Why did they do that? Because they're trying to change the footprint of the mall for something that has nothing to do with the community. So that's kind of the basic fundamental principle. I also talk in there about the principle of the appearance of activity. Dysfunctional companies are notorious for being a beehive of activity, but none of that activity is what I call productive work. I mean, you go in the office, you walk in the hall, and you'll see a glass door there and a glass window of people in a meeting. Well, some of those people have been in meetings in that meeting for days. They never showered or ate, for a couple days. What are they doing in there? God knows. And things just don't move forward. I call productive work, actually producing a product or a service, which many dysfunctional companies struggle to do. After customer service, after sales service. Don't get me started on that. I have a whole chapter on customer service, where, if an employee is caught talking to a customer, they get reprimanded, right? You know, and so trying to improve things, and those are that's what I call productive work. And the dysfunctional company does whatever it can to make sure you don't get your job done.
How has this move towards remote working played into this?
Okay, so that's a really good point, Pat, because when I was almost done with the book just before COVID, around the end of 2019. And then COVID hit. And then I kind of stopped in my tracks writing, because I thought, wait a minute, I have nothing in the book about remote work. So as you know from looking at the book, there's quite a bit in there about remote work. In fact, every situation I talk about from both sides, from in the office and then from the remote work perspective. So, and then I make a lot of jokes about that as well. I talk about how the remote workers are still part of the office, and they're still part of, the whole bureaucracy and the hierarchy and the turf battles, which are so fundamentally important to keeping the dysfunctional company alive and breathing. you know. And I talk about, for instance, remote employees need to be clothed at all times. How sometimes just wear a shirt and a blouse, and then pajamas or God knows what else, nothing underneath. Don't stand up if you're not dressed, if you're undressed. We don't want to be seen how you actually are. And I also talk about how, kids screaming in the background and pets barking and screaming, that they actually add quite a bit to the meetings, because a lot of what goes in the meetings is nonsense anyways, and what the humans are saying, can be supplemented usually by a barking dog. I talk about the family ferret. If the ferret yawns during the meeting, that means the proposal should be, sent back for revision. That kind of a thing. But on a serious note, one of the things that I do mention about remote work, there's kind of this debate going on in the corporate world about remote work. Should employees now, be in the office all the time? Should we allow remote work? When employees are working remotely, they feel disconnected, that kind of thing. And my answer to that is that, I think there shouldn't be an ironclad rule. I think CEOs would say you must come to the office, or, you don't have to come to the office at all. It depends on the individual. The last company I worked at, which I didn't consider a dysfunctional company, it was Coal Fire Systems. It was a very well run company. They didn't have an office in Chicago. So this 6.5 years I was there, I worked remote the whole time, and I felt very much a part of the team. We had chat rooms, we had all this stuff going on, and occasionally, once a year, we'd have like group meetings in
Mm.
person. So I don't feel that those people are necessarily disconnected. I felt just as much part of the office. I worked, regular 8 to 6 kind of a day, 9 to 5 kind of a day. So my answer is that it depends. It also depends on the industry. Certain industries require, face-to-face presence, like certain types of, investment banking, where, watching the body language of the participants, is really
Yeah.
critical, and that's hard to get, on a remote call. But I disagree with, where it's got to be one way or the other, and that CEOs should have this hard and fast rule. It depends.
Yeah,
So
I think a hybrid approach I personally find attractive. I find it very interesting when I meet people who've been on my podcast in person. It's a
yes,
totally different experience than it is
yes,
meeting online.
yes, very much so. That's very perceptive. But again, as I say, I felt at the last company I was at, I felt like I was very much a part of the company. I didn't feel like, out of sight, out of mind. There are actually people whose job requires them to be out and travel a lot. The road warriors, I talk about that, and talk about how they need to be, they need to, they'll often gather around the bar, which is a critical part of their work, and they'll talk about various items that they filched from hotels and so on, and their collection of airline vomit bags. That's fundamental, because I talk about people being nauseous in meetings and endless meetings, and one of the things that's put in your kit, in your starter kit, when you're in employee, I call it employee disorientation, when you're hired, is your set of vomit bags. But road warriors are required to depend on, not on purchasing, but they collect them from the airlines that they fly, and then they can brag about their collection in the bar. So
Okay, fighting turf battles is better than cooperating. I love
so
that one.
well, okay, that's really key. Every dysfunctional company must have a hierarchy. So I call it kind of like the embedded hierarchy of the bureaucracy, right? The pyramid, right, with the peak at the top, with silos embedded on top of it. It's very, very critical that those silos don't communicate. So I was at companies where I get the same question asked maybe 4 or 5 times a day from different parts of the company because they don't communicate. And I thought, why don't you talk to each other? Well, we're not allowed to, and we can't, and that group, and we don't like that group, and they smell bad in the office, or they wear the wrong t-shirts, that kind of a thing. And that's the key thing. So the other thing that's part of that is you have these people that are not really, I say, they're not interested in the business. In fact, they probably don't even know what business the company is in, because they're too busy building their little empires, their little kingdoms. I don't care if they're dead. I need them in my team. I need more. This is the kicker. This always kind of threw me over the edge. FTE. Why don't they just call them employees? What is, I don't even know what FTE means. I've heard it in multiple companies. That's how employees are referred to, as some sort of an acronym. Now that's in another habit where I talk about communication, and acronyms are really critical to the dysfunctional company. You should reach a point where you don't even need to talk in full sentences. You just say acronyms. So, yeah, so turf battles are really, really fundamental. They're real key. You've got to make sure that people are combative. The company needs to be at war with itself. And the
This
thing
this
with the
sounds like a modern day hospital, you know?
it does, well, I've had healthcare people, in fact, several nurses that I've met have actually commented on the book. They're on the Amazon. Those are a couple of those people are nurses at a local hospital where my wife gets some treatments. But another thing about the pyramid is because it's narrow at the top, right? And you have all these people kind of elbowing, trying to move up. I talk about, you can tell the ambitious people because they have a rear view mirror on their shoulder looking for people that are out there to stab them in the back. So that kind of whole pyramid thing it also creates kind of this battling culture, because it gets fewer and fewer at the top. And then I talk about the corporate the corporate elite, the cabal of insiders, I call it. So that's the people at the very top, and they're above the clouds. And you know how a mountain goes up in the clouds, they're above the clouds. And people trying to scale the peak have often fallen off, right? But those that penetrate through, they see a veneer of lost executives, people that are in bunkers and hiding, and they never meet with employees, and they have really no idea what goes on in the company. There's a lot
But
of,
they're paid
so
well for it.
they get paid well, and they get
Yeah.
paid too well for doing nothing sometimes. I'm not bashing all executives. There's a lot of very, very sharp, brilliant, business-minded people, but those often are the ones that work their way up the ladder, in that company. They started out at the bottom, there's a culture where people would actually, rather than coming in, from some other industry or coming in as a consultant or something like that, or being kind of like this aristocracy of CEOs. So that's in a nutshell what we talk when I talk about all the corporate battles,
Now, I
turf battles.
notice you don't have a chapter on consultants.
Well, Pat, I do mention consultants.
Yes, you
Yes,
do.
I do mention them. Those are the people you can see in the office wearing tinfoil helmets, and they're spouting all kinds of gobbledygook that they read in books that you could pick up at Barnes and Noble in the business section, right? Or something that they learned in business school. And they're often kind of like the hatchet men or hatchet women that are there to do the dirty work that the company might not want to do. They'll say, well, let's lay off this whole department. Well, the consultant told us to do that. We didn't really want to do that. Our employees are valuable to us. Yeah, right,
Yeah,
right,
no,
right. I
they're not
get it.
employees. What's the acronym? An acronym for employees? FTP or something?
FTEs, they're called.
FTEs. Okay, FTEs.
Yeah. As I say, for years I've heard that term. I still don't know what it means. I have an acronym dictionary in the back of the book, but that's for the acronyms that I created. The ADR, which is the asshole density ratio, which it tells you how screwed up your company is.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and
talk
and
about that ratio because that's an important ratio.
That's really critical. Yeah. So what you do is, and I modified that for remote employees as well. So that's where I brought in the whole remote thing. So there's two ways to measure that. One is if you're at your cubicle, you have to take 100 steps in all directions, and you count the number of assholes that are in that area, right? And then you have the ESF, the executive supplement factor. So if there aren't any executives within that immediate 100-step area, you have to make sure that you add them in so that you have a full ratio. And then that's the ratio of the total number of actual employees within that required space times 100. So that's a percentage. And that tells you, how dysfunctional your company is. Now, if you're remote employees, I know I always had on my desktop, tons of icons of all my coworkers, my teammates, maybe people in other departments where I had to work with them closely, God forbid, working with other departments. That's kind of scary. And, so you count the number of assholes that are on your screen, and then you add that executive supplement factor, and that's how you can figure out, how dysfunctional company, how dysfunctional your company is. Usually over 70% is kind of a good thumbnail. If 50%, things are kind of, iffy, where you never know, could go either way. So that's a key thing.
Well,
And
the
then
the
I have,
ratio is a little subjective. I mean, if you have a bad day, the
yeah.
percentage is going up.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, this is a humor book, it's not a scientific thing, but I do make it look official and pseudoscience. I actually put the formula in the book. But I think you get the idea is that, a lot has to do with personalities. I went to a top business school, and I'm not saying that just to brag, but we had an organizational behavior class where they talk about different organizational structures. You have case studies about things that can go wrong, but nobody teaches about psychology, and I think that's a big thing, because there's people with all kinds of power issues that I ran into that were difficult to deal with, difficult personalities. How do you work with these people, right? And if you know a little bit of psychology, there's one company that I went to where they had a little psychological training program, which was really fantastic. That it taught you how to communicate, because you could, with that program, you could pick out certain personality styles so you could communicate with that person. Now, I make fun of that in the book, where I say it helps people pick on them, make fun of other people better, because now you know what their weaknesses are. But it's something that's just really ignored, I think, a lot in business schools, and the workplace
Well,
is
business schools
psychology.
or graduate schools, and I would say society in general, if we were all a little more psychologically savvy, things would flow much more easily. And if we were just psychologically savvy about ourselves, our lives would flow a lot more
Oh,
easily.
sure. I mean, there's a lot of narcissists that are, in these companies. And I'm not saying that all the people are narcissists, but it's one of the types of dysfunctional behaviors that you find in these
Oh, but you
companies.
see, I love narcissists. You know why? They're easy to manipulate.
Oh, that's a great attitude, Pat.
No,
Yeah.
seriously. All you have to do is find what is their driving need.
Oh,
And you
yeah.
can push them this way, you can push them that way. It took me many years to figure this out and some really
Yeah.
difficult times, but ultimately, a narcissist is your friend.
Interesting. That's going to go in the sequel. It's kind of like,
Just
the kid
remember to
likes a
footnote
certain
me.
type of candy. Yeah. Yeah. Kid
Okay,
likes a certain type of candy. Give him the candy. Yeah.
if you're not in a meeting, you will be assigned to one.
Okay, so meetings are the bane of the existence of the dysfunctional company. So I have another habit in there where I talk all about email and communication. So if it can be done in an email, now that's not enough. You got to have a meeting, right? I kid you not. I was at a company where I wanted to add a column to a spreadsheet, and we were on the phone. I said, let me just send you an email. No, we got to have a meeting. So we got this executive, gets the executive on a meeting, and the executive uses some obscenity, say, add the effing column to the spreadsheet already. So meetings are like the lifeblood of, or maybe the things that squeeze the life out of these companies. If you are not in a meeting, you will be assigned to one. So in a dysfunctional company, you have these goons walking in the halls with armbands that say MP. It stands for meeting police. And if they see anyone in the hall, they confront them and say, ask them where they're going, what they're doing. And if they're not in a meeting, they'll have a list of meetings, and they will put you in a meeting even if it has nothing to do with what you're doing, or your job function. So I have a whole thing about meeting culture, about how in meetings, I have what are called packed and unpacked meetings. So, unpacked meetings are those without an agenda, people just kind of ramble on, and I talk about how PowerPoint should be absolutely required in every meeting, and you should use every annoying feature on PowerPoint. Every employee should be issued a laser pointer so they can point during the
And
meeting
with
at
the
the
PowerPoint slides, you have to just read them. God forbid you could talk about any aspect of it.
That's the silliest thing, Pat. I'd see a PowerPoint. It's like, could you do this meeting without PowerPoint? You have to, they can't, it's like they're reading a script out loud. And then I talk about how in the meeting you should have like a first aid kit, because there might be people that'll pass out. So you have to have smelling salts. You might need in case someone has cardiac arrest, you might have that, the electronic device, the CPR, that kind of a thing. Now, then I also talk about, on the other hand, the meetings that are packed, where there's an actual agenda. So not the issue isn't that how can you have a meeting? This guy is just anti any kind of a meeting. No, I'm not. But I mean, we're talking one extreme or the other, where it's so packed full of information, and it's so rigid that the people's heads are spinning, and they pass out. So meetings are a big part. Endless meetings. The other thing I talk about, I call it the TWEAM. That's the acronym for the weekly meeting. So I'd have meetings where um, I'd go in the meeting and there was nothing new that week, and they wouldn't cancel the meeting, and people are talking about their pets and their kids and their vacations and this and that. And I thought, just cancel the meeting. I've got 20 other things to do. And the nature of the work that I did, I often would have to schedule like a full day of security testing. So I had to have that block of time, and right there in the middle of it is this like toothache, and I'd have to reschedule with the client because I couldn't take off an hour. I had to work consistently, and it was that damn meeting that was just getting in the way. Now that's one meeting, but again, I used to run into people that were meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and that's where that came from. And I said to a guy once, you need your headphones surgically attached to your head, because why bother taking them off?
Now, maybe my favorite chapter was about a customer service.
Oh
And
yeah,
you called human contact with customers is prohibited. Now, I've
yeah.
had 2 in the last several years. I can think of 2 really positive experiences I had with customer support. Um, and I've had a lot of experiences.
The systems have become automated, and I get it. These big companies, sure, they get thousands of calls, and especially a dysfunctional company because everybody's calling to complain because the product doesn't work or the service wasn't delivered properly. But it's become a joke. You can't get to a human being at all. So you go through a menu, and then the menu doesn't have exactly what you want. You never get there. So if the menu follows the path of what you want, I call it menu bingo, where you actually got to what you were doing. But the dysfunctional company has to make it complicated. So menu bingo should not be allowed either. And there isn't even a phone number of who you could call to talk to a person. And if you go to the website, there's now that little chat bot in the corner. It's
Who
not
knows
even a
nothing,
human.
who can
It's
never help you. Yeah.
never help you, and it's not even a real person anymore. It's a
Oh,
computer
no.
generated thing.
Well,
AI, man.
well, I don't know about you. I should be embarrassed to admit this, but I find myself yelling at my phone when I'm confronted with these things,
I
which
mentioned that.
which is just terrible and not like me, but I get so frustrated with menu bingo and the
Yeah.
inability to get out of this maze.
It's terrible, and I mentioned in the book how people they yell at their phone. They start yelling, "Representative, representative, Mayday, Mayday! I'm drowning! Help me!" I mean, I
911.
I have a story. When my father died, and we had to move all the credit cards over to my mom and I at that time. All the credit card companies were pretty. It was just a quick phone call. One credit card company who shall remain anonymous, because I changed names to protect the guilty. They had my mom and I on the phone for an hour and a half, and at that point, my mom already had dementia. She's going, "What's he saying over there?" I said, "Mom, just say yes." Hour and a half. You'd think they'd get it straight. Then I get a letter in the mail from them saying, "We're sorry to hear about the death of Joel Dubin." So I called them up and I said, "This is Joel Dubin and I'm still alive, but I think you're trying to kill me." And then the rep, she reads from a script saying, "Well, we're sorry for this inconvenience." Blah, blah, like that. Oh, God. So,
It's mind-boggling, but you have collected such a great set of stories. My hat is really off to you because it is just one hysterical incident after another, and they all ring true.
absolutely. I think everyone can relate to something in this book. Everyone's gone through something. Even executives. I've had executives read it, and I was nervous, that they go, "Oh, this is not my company," and what are you talking about? You never rose to a level executive. I didn't, but I did deal with a lot of executives, and they ran the gamut. As I say, there were ones that were really brilliant, brilliant business people, great strategists, and they were really sharp and they good people skills, and others like, how the hell did you get here? What did you do? Where did you must have been on the right political track to get there. So, yeah, and I had one executive who was a retired person from a Fortune 500 company. Just happens to be a personal friend. He says, "This book sounds angry." I says, "But it was very funny. I liked it, but it sounds angry." I says, "Well, it's interesting you say that because maybe for me, as I say, it was therapy, getting out, venting my spleen of what I've had to deal with for so many years."
Well, I think it's great therapy for all of us because we all deal with this in one part of our lives or another. Where can people find your book?
Okay, so the book is on sale on Amazon, and it's showing up in other small book. It's in other small bookstores as well. So go to Amazon. I have a website, dysfunctionalcompany.com.